Harold always liked nights. He felt the silence helped organize his thoughts. After turning 80, that same silence started growing inside him, like a room too big for just one voice. He had dinner early, washed the dishes, and left his mug upside down to dry. His routine was on track, but something was missing, the little thing that gives meaning to the end of the day: company. He glanced at his phone. 3 old conversations, all inactive. He scrolled through his contacts, passing by Michael, Card Club, Susan, neighbor, Ben, church. He took a deep breath and put the phone away. He preferred listening to the distant sounds from the street and his own memories. You're watching Life Guidance After 60, a channel created especially to offer advice and life stories for those over 60. Since we're a new channel, we need your help. Please hit like and subscribe to follow our upcoming stories. Harold looked at the worn-out deck of cards that reminded him of evenings with his wife. They'd laugh at the same old jokes, he'd pretend to cheat, and she'd pretend to believe him. Today, the table seemed bigger, the cards heavier. Harold pulled one out, took a sip of water, and placed the card back on top. Instead of filling the emptiness with sad memories, he tried a strategy, writing down 3 good things from the day. I walked to the bakery. I managed to message my grandson. The soup turned out better than yesterday's. Simple, but it helped his mind stay steady. The clock showed an uncertain hour, somewhere between the end of the night and the beginning of tiredness. Not in the mood for long TV series or repetitive news, he turned on the radio softly. An old song played. Harold hummed along with the chorus. His voice came out thin but steady. When he finished, he chuckled at himself, and that laugh sparked an idea: if he could sing alone, maybe he could talk to someone tomorrow. He grabbed a notepad and wrote, "Call Michael, Tuesday, 10 a.m. He circled it. A small commitment, a big step. And it was in that simple act, writing down a phone call for the next day, that Harold realized something powerful: even the heaviest silence can turn into a promise of companionship. Because sometimes, hope fits inside a small circle scribbled on paper. His phone buzzed with a notification. An unknown number. He answered. On the other end, a young woman asked for Mrs. Parker. Wrong number. Harold politely explained. The woman apologized, thanked him, and wished him a good night. The call lasted less than a minute, born from a mistake, yet it still warmed his chest. A real voice, a sentence addressed directly to him. After the call ended, he held the phone to his ear for a few seconds longer, as if holding on to the echo. A memory of an old fall in the kitchen flashed through his mind. He checked the rug, adjusted the chair, and moved the water closer. He did everything practically, without fuss. He'd already learned that small precautions prevent big scares. He double-checked his medications for the next day, placed the pill organizer near the table, and wrote in his notebook, Appointment, 12th, bring list of questions. Writing down his questions always helped when talking to the doctor. Clarity saves you from unnecessary suffering. He opened the fridge. An apple, some eggs, a container of soup. He thought about skipping the late-night snack, but the nutritionist had been clear: eating regularly keeps your energy up. He sliced half an apple, spread butter on a piece of toast, sat down, and ate slowly. While chewing, he remembered the invitation stuck on the fridge door: community lunch, Wednesdays, 12 p.m. He didn't feel ready for crowded tables. Still, he pulled the magnet and moved the invitation front and center, right where he could see it. Sometimes, moving a piece of paper changes your mindset. The radio announced the time. Harold turned it off. He picked up his pen again. At the top of the page, he wrote, 3 reasons to wake up tomorrow. He thought for a moment and filled in, walk 2 extra blocks. Try Ben's omelet recipe. Call Michael. Nothing grand, just things within reach. When he finished, he felt his breathing grow lighter. It wasn't excitement. It was something more useful, a thread of direction. And as he looked at those simple lines on the paper, Harold smiled faintly. He realized the weight of loneliness could be lightened when turned into plans, even small ones. Because sometimes, the difference between another empty night and a fresh start lies in 3 sentences scribbled before bed. On the nightstand lay an unsealed envelope. Inside was a letter he'd been slowly writing to his wife, a late, but honest, conversation. He added 2 lines, "Today I sang our song. Off-key, as always, and I smiled." He tucked the envelope away. Then he sat in silence, not out of emptiness, but by choice. Silence can also be rest when your mind learns where to lean. Before lying down, he checked the note about the phone call, the lunch invitation, and the list of questions for his appointment. 3 visible reminders. 3 small beacons. He turned off the light, left the radio quiet, and felt his body asking for sleep. Loneliness was still there, but its edges were softer. There was a simple plan scribbled in pen, and that alone changed the size of the night. Tomorrow, a familiar voice might answer on the other end of the line. And with it, 2 or 3 laughs. Maybe even a card game scheduled. For now, it was enough just to hold on to that thought, and rest. Irene had always taken pride in keeping her house tidy. Everything had its place, and every detail reflected her care. At 85, that pride had become a daily battle against her own limitations. That morning, she decided to change the bed sheets. A task she used to finish in minutes now left her breathless. She held her breath, stretched the fabric with effort, and had to lean against the headboard to catch her breath. She felt frustrated, not by the task itself, but by the feeling that her body no longer kept up with her will to act. The stairs were another ghost. The laundry basket waited at the top of the flight, and Irene eyed the steps with apprehension. The fear of tripping was so strong that she often preferred to let the laundry pile up. She remembered when she used to go down the stairs singing, never thinking about risk. Now, each step felt like a test of courage. This change weighed heavier on her mind than on her arms or legs. It was a living reminder that time demands its toll, even from those who've always been careful. Ed, her neighbor and longtime friend, had gone through something similar. At 84, he slipped in the kitchen and fell onto his backside. Nothing serious, but the fall shook his confidence. From that day on, he started seeing every step as a threat. He avoided walking in the backyard, where he used to spend hours tending to flowers and mowing the lawn. The garden, once a source of joy, became a distant memory. Safety now seemed more valuable than pleasure. He told himself it was better to avoid risks, but deep down, he missed mornings filled with the smell of damp earth and the pride of seeing everything well kept. A weakening body creates an invisible dilemma. The desire to stay active clashes with the need to be cautious. Irene still folded laundry, but in short bursts. She rested between each piece, hiding her fatigue even from herself. Ed kept his gardening tools neatly stored, lined up as if he might use them at any moment, even though he knew he wouldn't be working the soil again anytime soon. These small adjustments weren't just new habits, they were ways to disguise the pain of losing independence. That night, Irene lay in bed with the sheets finally changed. She stared at the ceiling and reflected on how disproportionately hard that simple task had been. At the same time, there was a hint of victory. Despite the difficulty, she'd managed to do it. With every completed gesture, however slow, she felt she was resisting the idea that age was stealing her control. Ed, for his part, sat on the porch with a cup of tea, watching the garden from afar. The flowers growing without his care were silent witnesses to his longing, yet they also reminded him that life went on. And in that tension between limits and persistence, both found the strength needed to face another day. And it was in this contrast between fragility and persistence that Irene and Ed discovered something essential: every small victory counts as a quiet act of resistance against time. Because even when the body sets limits, the will to keep going remains the greatest act of courage. Patricia was 86 and had always been seen as strong, used to handling her own problems in silence. A mild cough appeared one ordinary afternoon, and she assumed it would pass. She made herself some tea, went to bed early, and told herself everything would be better the next day. Days went by, the cough turned into a fever, her weakness grew, but she kept repeating the same phrase, "It's just a cold, I don't want to bother my son." She held on to the belief that asking for help would be a burden, when in truth, it would have been an act of care. Her body, however, began to exact a heavy price for that choice. The fever drained her energy, her dry mouth signaled dehydration, and even getting up to fetch water became an overwhelming effort. Time seemed to loop endlessly, with no clear end in sight. Loneliness magnified every symptom. In a full house, someone would have noticed her tired eyes, her lack of appetite, or her unsteady steps. Alone, Patricia simply waited for time to fix things. But instead of healing her, time only made her more fragile. It was her neighbor, Mr. Howard, who noticed she hadn't been at the gate. He found it odd not to see Patricia watering her plants or picking up the newspaper. He knocked on her door and called out twice. When she finally answered, her voice was hoarse, barely audible. He insisted on coming in and found his friend sitting at the table, pale and too weak even to stand. A quick call to her family, and within hours, Patricia was receiving medical care. Just a few simple treatments, fluids and supervised rest, were enough for her strength to start returning. The scare, however, left a lasting warning. Staying silent about your body's needs can be more dangerous than the illness itself. That night, lying in bed as her strength slowly returned, Patricia understood the lesson life had handed her. Asking for help doesn't make you less, it's actually a sign of wisdom. Because sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is admit your own vulnerability and allow someone else to care for you. Meanwhile, Martin, 82, was fighting a different silent battle. Since his wife's death, he'd lost interest in cooking. The fridge held forgotten leftovers, and the stove rarely got used. His meals had been reduced to crackers or weak coffee. His body missed proper nourishment, but the emptiness of the house weighed heavier than hunger. Cooking just for himself felt pointless. Days stretched long, and his vitality faded a little more each week. Then a friend, noticing his apathy, invited him to a community lunch group. Martin hesitated but agreed to go along. In the hall, he found tables full of people chatting, a variety of dishes, and laughter filling the room. He picked up his spoon shyly, but soon found himself smiling at the memory of flavors he'd long set aside. More than just food, that gathering restored his sense of belonging. He realized that nourishing the body also nourished the soul. At this stage of life, health depended not only on tests and medications. It relied on the courage to recognize limits, accept help, and seek connection. Patricia learned that hiding her symptoms nearly cost her life. Martin understood that eating well could bring back joy and strength. Each in their own way found a path forward. And the common thread between them was simple: alone, everything feels heavier; with company, even weakness finds relief. And it was in that reunion, with a full table and voices all around, that Martin realized, life tastes better when shared. Because in the end, it's not just the body that needs nourishment, the heart also needs to feel part of something greater. Walter, at 84, had always been the kind of man who valued his independence. He liked driving to the market, paying his own bills, and fixing things around the house by himself. But one autumn afternoon, sitting in front of a stack of bills, he realized life's math no longer added up. The car needed repairs, taxes were overdue, and his pension barely covered the essentials. He stared at the two open bills on the table, trying to decide which one to sacrifice. Inside, fear outweighed shame. Losing the car meant losing the last piece of freedom that still made him feel useful. The thought of depending on rides from others suffocated him more than any debt ever could. Dorothy, at 89, faced a different kind of ghost. One morning she answered the phone and heard a firm, polite voice claiming to represent her bank. The conversation sounded legitimate. She believed it, answered the questions, and gave out information. Minutes later, she realized she'd been tricked. The scam took part of her savings, but what hurt more was the invisible wound, shame. She went weeks without telling anyone, shrinking into herself at home, even avoiding neighbors. Every ring of the phone made her heart race. Dorothy, who once loved chatting with strangers, fell silent, as if every word she spoke could be used against her. Ruth, at 90, had her own way of dealing with emptiness. Every morning, she'd make coffee and set 2 cups on the table. While buttering her toast, she'd talk to her husband, who had passed away years earlier. She'd ask how he'd slept, tell him about her dreams, and recall old stories. To an outsider, it might seem like madness. To her, it was how she kept alive a presence that time kept trying to erase. Some days, this ritual brought comfort; other days, it only deepened her longing, turning breakfast into a battlefield between memory and absence. These stories reveal different layers of loneliness after 80. Walter struggled.